The hall was already full before the evening truly began. Soft lights hung from the high ceiling, glowing over polished floors and long rows of chairs. People arrived in quiet groups, dressed in neat suits, elegant dresses, and coats that spoke of comfort and status. Their voices stayed low, careful not to disturb the refined mood of the place. This was not an event where people laughed loudly or spoke freely. It was a place meant for control, for reputation, for showing that one belonged among the best. The audience was made up of people who knew music well, or at least believed they did. Some were performers themselves. Others were patrons, sponsors, critics, and longtime supporters of the arts. Many had attended similar events countless times. They knew what to expect, and more importantly, they believed they knew who was worth listening to. The stage at the front of the hall held a single grand piano, its surface shining under the lights. It waited quietly, like it had seen many stories before. As the seats filled, people scanned the room, recognizing familiar faces. A nod here, a polite smile there. Some conversations carried pride, others carried quiet competition. Everyone seemed aware that this evening mattered, even if only as another chance to confirm their place in a world that valued skill, polish, and approval. Behind the stage, away from the audience's view, a woman waited. She was not pacing or stretching her hands nervously like some performers did. She sat still, her posture relaxed but upright. Her clothing was simple and clean, nothing that drew attention. There was no sign of luxury or effort to impress. If someone had passed by quickly, they might not have noticed her at all. She listened to the sound of the hall through the walls, the soft hum of voices, the scrape of chairs, the distant cough of someone clearing their throat. These sounds did not unsettle her. In fact, they felt familiar. She had learned long ago how to sit calmly in moments that others found heavy with pressure. Waiting had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. They were steady. These hands had worked hard in silence for many years. They had known cold rooms, late nights, and moments of doubt that came without warning. Yet now, they showed none of that history. They looked peaceful, ready, almost ordinary. When her turn was announced, there was no dramatic introduction, no long speech about her achievements, no list of awards, just a simple call to come forward. The sound echoed softly through the hall. She stood and walked toward the stage with slow, measured steps. Her shoes made a gentle sound against the floor, barely noticeable. As she appeared from the side, a few people in the audience glanced up, then back down again. Some barely looked at all. She did not fit the image many expected. There was no visible confidence meant to impress, no forced smile, no attempt to command attention. A few quiet whispers moved through the crowd. She doesn't look familiar. Is she part of the program? Maybe a student. The woman reached the piano and paused for a moment. She did not rush. She did not bow deeply or scan the room. She simply acknowledged the space with a small nod, then sat down on the bench. She adjusted it slightly, as someone who knew exactly how she liked to sit. Then she placed her feet carefully on the floor. The hall grew quieter, though not completely silent. The kind of silence that filled the room was not respect yet. It was curiosity mixed with doubt. Some audience members leaned back in their seats, arms crossed. Others checked the program again, trying to find her name, wondering if they had missed something important. From the judges' table, a few pairs of eyes observed her closely. They had seen many performers over the years. They could often tell within seconds whether someone belonged on that stage. Right now, they were unsure. Her calmness confused them more than confidence would have. She rested her hands above the keys but did not play right away. She took a slow breath, not a deep one meant to steady nerves, but a natural breath, like she was settling into a familiar place. The piano felt solid under her fingers, as it always did. This was not a stranger to her. It was an old companion. As she waited, her mind did not race. Instead, memories passed quietly through her thoughts, not as distractions, but as reminders. She remembered rooms much smaller than this hall, rooms where the walls were thin and the nights were long. She remembered practicing when others slept, keeping the sound low, afraid to disturb but unwilling to stop. She remembered moments when music was the only place she felt understood. None of this showed on her face. To the audience, she simply looked composed, almost too composed. Some mistook it for indifference. In the back rows, a few people exchanged glances. One person leaned toward another and whispered something with a slight smile. It was not cruel, but it was not kind either. It carried the easy judgment of those who felt secure in their position. The lights above the stage seemed a little brighter now. The piano keys reflected a soft glow. The woman straightened her back slightly and let her fingers hover closer to the keys still. She did not play. The pause stretched just long enough to make some people uncomfortable. A quiet cough echoed. Someone shifted in their seat. The hall felt suspended, like it was holding its breath without realizing why. For the woman, this pause was important. It was the space where everything else fell away. Expectations, opinions, the weight of the room, all of it stayed outside this moment. Here, there was only the piano, the music waiting inside her, and the honesty she had learned to trust. She glanced down at the keys, her expression unchanged. No fear, no pride, just focused. At that moment, few in the audience could have guessed what was about to happen. To them, this was just another performance slot in a long evening, another person given a chance, likely to be forgotten by the next day. They did not know the years behind her calm. They did not know how many times she had played without applause, how often she had been overlooked, how many doors had closed quietly, without explanation. All they saw was a woman sitting at a piano, calm, quiet, and unassuming. The hall waited. And then, slowly, she lowered her hands. Just before the first note, there was a final stillness, a moment so soft it almost went unnoticed. In that space, nothing had changed yet. The audience remained the same. The judges remained uncertain. The room remained full of quiet doubt. But that moment marked the edge of something new, a line between what people expected and what they were about to experience. And though no one realized it yet, the calm way she sat at the piano was not a sign of weakness. It was the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove, only something true to share. The first sound that came from the piano was soft, almost fragile. It was not loud enough to demand attention, and not dramatic enough to impress right away. A few people in the audience barely noticed it at first. Some were still shifting in their seats. Others were finishing quiet thoughts in their minds. The note floated through the hall like a gentle question, not asking for approval, only asking to be heard. She kept her hands light on the keys. Her shoulders stayed relaxed. There was no rush in her movement. The melody moved slowly, carefully, as if it was finding its way through the space. To those listening closely, there was a sense of control in every sound. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was forced. A man in the front row leaned slightly forward without realizing it. He had attended many performances in this hall, and he was used to grand openings meant to show power and confidence. This was different. It felt quiet in a way that made him curious rather than bored. The woman's face remained calm. She did not look at the audience. Her eyes rested gently on the piano keys, not staring, but aware. Each note seemed to come from a place deeper than practice alone. It carried patience. It carried restraint. In the middle rows, a few whispers faded. Someone who had been flipping through the program slowly stopped. Another person lowered their crossed arms. The music had not changed much yet, but something in the room was shifting. The melody repeated itself, but with small changes. A note held a little longer. Another fell slightly quicker. These were not mistakes. They were choices. The kind of choices made by someone who understood not only the music, but the silence around it. One of the judges lifted their head. At first, they had been watching out of habit, ready to make notes. Now, they paused. The performance was not loud, but it was clear. The sound filled the hall without pushing against it. As the music continued, the woman's hands began to move with more freedom. The softness remained, but there was a quiet strength growing underneath. It was like watching calm water that hit a strong current below the surface. In her mind, she was not thinking about the audience. She was thinking about the story inside the music. She had played this piece many times before, in many different places, but tonight, it felt different. The room was larger. The eyes watching were sharper. Still, the reason she played remained the same. She remembered moments when music was the only thing that stayed with her. Times when words failed, when people left, when promises broke quietly. Music had never asked her to explain herself. It had only asked her to be honest. The melody slowly grew richer. Notes began to layer over one another, creating a deeper sound. It was no longer something that could be ignored. The piano's voice carried across the hall, reaching even those sitting at the back. A woman near the aisle closed her eyes without meaning to. She had come expecting a pleasant evening, nothing more. Now, she felt something tug at her chest. Something familiar but unexpected. The woman at the piano leaned slightly closer to the instrument, not out of tension, but connection. Her fingers moved with confidence now, pressing the keys more firmly, letting the sound breathe. The music began to change direction. Where it had once felt careful, it now felt certain. The rhythm became clearer. The pauses became more intentional. Each break between notes felt like a breath shared between the player and the room. A quiet respect began to replace the earlier doubt. No one spoke now. Even the small noises of movement faded. The hall was listening. One of the judges slowly put their pen down. They were no longer counting errors or waiting for a big mistake. They were simply hearing the performance as it unfolded. The woman's calm never left her. Even as the piece grew more complex, her expression stayed steady. This was not a performance built on showing off. It was built on trust in her hands, trust in the music, trust in the moment. The melody reached a section that demanded more from the player. The notes moved faster, climbing higher, then falling gently. Her fingers responded without struggle. There was no visible effort, no sharp movements, only flow somewhere in a hall. Someone let out a slow breath they did not realize they had been holding. The sound was quiet, but it marked a shared feeling. The music now carried emotion that words could not easily explain. It was not sadness and not joy alone. It felt like truth, like a life lived quietly, yet deeply. The woman's hands danced across the keys, not wildly, but with purpose. Each movement felt earned. Each sound felt placed exactly where it belonged. She was no longer just playing notes. She was telling something about herself without speaking. About patience, about endurance, about choosing to stay gentle in a world that often rewarded noise. In the front rows, faces softened. In the back rows, attention sharpened. People who had once been unsure now sat fully present. The melody slowed again, returning to its earlier softness. But it was not the same softness as before. This time, it carried weight, like a quiet voice that had been heard and did not need to shout anymore. The woman allowed the sound to linger, letting notes fade naturally. She did not rush to the next phrase. She trusted the silence to do its work. The hall felt different now. The doubt that once filled it had thinned, replaced by something closer to respect, maybe even wonder. As she played, the woman remained unaware of how much she was changing the room. She was not watching faces or reading reactions. She was following the music to its next place. The piece moved toward a turning point. The sound grew fuller, stronger, carrying confidence without arrogance. It was clear now that this was not a simple performance. This was a conversation between the player and every listener present. The audience was no longer waiting for her to prove herself. They were waiting to see where the music would take them next. The woman's calm presence at the piano now made sense. It was not emptiness. It was depth. Depth built over years of quiet work, unseen effort, and steady belief. As her hands continued to move, the room leaned into the sound, drawn in without resistance. The music had crossed an invisible line. There was no turning back. What began as a gentle question was becoming a clear, confident statement. And though the performance was far from over, everyone in the hall understood one thing now. This was not an ordinary moment, and whatever came next would only deepen its impact. The music continued to grow, not in noise, but in meaning. Each new phrase felt like it carried something personal, something lived. The woman at the piano remained steady, her breathing calm, her movement smooth. The earlier softness was still there, but now it was wrapped in quiet confidence. The sound filled the hall in a way that made time feel slower. People were no longer thinking about what came before or what would happen after. They were simply there, inside the moment. The kind of moment that does not ask permission, but gently takes hold. Her hands moved faster now, not rushed, but certain. The notes flowed together like a long conversation that had been waiting to be spoken. There were rises that felt hopeful, and falls that felt thoughtful. Nothing felt random. Everything felt honest. In the audience, a man who had arrived with folded arms now sat with his hands resting quietly on his knees. He did not notice the change in himself. He only knew that something inside him had settled. The music did not demand his attention. It earned it. One of the judges shifted in their chair. They had heard this piece before, played by trained professionals in famous halls. Yet this version felt different. It did not feel rehearsed for approval. It felt lived. The woman leaned slightly forward as the piece moved into a more intense section. Her fingers pressed deeper into the keys, drawing out a richer sound. Still, her face showed no strain. There was no fight in her expression, only focused. As the sound grew fuller, it carried emotion that touched different people in different ways. For some, it brought back memories they had not thought about in years. For others, it created a feeling they could not name but did not want to lose. A woman in the back row wiped her eye quietly, surprised by the sudden warmth there. She did not feel embarrassed. The music made space for feeling without judgment. The rhythm shifted again, becoming more complex. The pauses between notes grew shorter, then longer. The changes were subtle, but powerful. They showed control, patience, and trust in the listener. The woman's hands moved across the keyboard with ease, crossing and returning without hesitation. This was not skill meant to impress. It was skill shaped by long hours of quiet practice, by mistakes made and learned from, by moments of doubt that did not win. Inside her, there was a calm awareness. She knew this part of the piece well. It was where the music asked the most from her, not just technically, but emotionally. She let it ask. She did not hold back. The sound swelled, filling every corner of the hall. It wrapped around the audience, pulling them closer together, even though no one moved. The room felt smaller, more connected. Someone near the aisle leaned forward, elbows resting on their legs, eyes fixed on the stage. They had come out of curiosity. Now, curiosity had turned into respect. The woman allowed the music to rise, then gently guided it downward. The change felt natural, like a deep breath after a long climb. The piano responded to her touch as if it understood. The judges were no longer watching her hands. They were listening with closed mouths and still bodies. Evaluation had given way to experience. The melody reached a place of quiet power. The notes were not fast, but they were strong. They carried weight without heaviness. Each sound landed and stayed, even after it faded. The woman's calm presence never broke. Even now, as the music demanded strength, she remained centered. This was not courage built on excitement. It was courage built on knowing who she was. In her mind, she was not thinking about winning anything. She was thinking about telling the truth of the music as clearly as she could. That was enough. The audience felt the shift. Something unspoken moved through the hall. The doubt that had once filled the air was gone. In its place was shared attention, shared feeling. The piece moved into another turning point. The rhythm softened again, creating space. The silence between notes felt just as important as the notes themselves. A man in the front row swallowed slowly. He had not expected to feel this way. He had come prepared to judge. Instead, he found himself listening without defense. The woman's hand slowed, letting the melody breathe. The sound became gentle again, but now it carried the memory of everything that had come before. It was softer, but deeper. The hall felt held by the music. No one shifted. No one whispered. Even the smallest movement seemed too loud for the moment. The woman lifted her hands slightly between phrases, letting the sound fade completely before continuing. This patience gave the music room to settle inside the listeners. She played the next section with careful clarity. Each note felt like it belonged exactly where it was. There was no excess, no empty show. The audience followed willingly. They were no longer watching a stranger at a piano. They were sharing an experience that felt rare and real. The music began to build once more, not rushing, but rising with purpose. It felt like a quiet promise being kept. The woman's posture remained steady. Her calm did not come from certainty of outcome. It came from trust in the process. The sound now carried a sense of arrival, not the end, but the understanding that something important was unfolding. In the room, hearts felt open, minds felt still. The piece was moving closer to its most powerful moment, and everyone listening knew it. They did not know how it would end, but they knew they wanted to stay with it until the very last note. The music now stood at a place where it could no longer hide what it meant. It had grown strong enough to carry everything she had kept inside for years. The woman at the piano felt it clearly. This was the part where the music asked her to give more than skill. It asked for truth. Her hands moved with steady purpose. The notes came faster, fuller, and more intense, yet never out of control. Each sound felt like a step forward, not rushed, not held back. The piano answered her touch with a deep, warm voice that filled the hall. The audience felt the change instantly. The music no longer floated gently. It stood firmly, like it had found its ground. People sat taller in their seats without knowing why. Something in the sound demanded respect. The woman's face remained calm, but inside, memories stirred. Long nights spent practicing when no one listened. Moments when she questioned whether her effort mattered. Times when she chose discipline over comfort, silence over praise. None of it felt heavy now. It felt necessary. The rhythm grew bolder. Her fingers pressed the keys with confidence, drawing out strong chords that echoed across the room. The sound was powerful, yet clear. There was no anger in it, no bitterness, only strength shaped by patience. One of the judges slowly leaned back, eyes fixed on the stage. They were no longer thinking about technique or form. They were feeling something deeper, something rare. In the audience, a man who had once smiled with doubt now sat completely still. His expression had changed. He looked as if he were listening not just with his ears, but with something closer to the heart. The music climbed higher, reaching a point where it felt almost overwhelming, then pulled back just enough to let the room breathe. The balance was perfect. The woman guided the sound with quiet authority. She was fully present now, not thinking of the hall, not thinking of the people watching, only listening to the music as it passed through her hands. This was the place she trusted most. The piano sang with depth and richness. Each note carried weight, yet moved freely. The sound wrapped around the listeners, leaving no space for distraction. A woman near the front pressed her lips together, holding back emotion. She did not know why tears were close. She only knew the music felt honest. The woman at the piano leaned slightly closer as the piece reached its emotional peak. Her movements became more expressive, but never dramatic. Everything stayed true. The sound rose again, stronger than before. This time, it did not feel like a question or a request. It felt like a statement. It spoke of resilience, of choosing to continue even when the path felt invisible, of staying calm when the world expected noise. The audience felt it clearly. The room held no doubt now, only attention. The woman's hands moved with quiet fire. Notes rolled out in steady waves, full and alive. The piano seemed to glow under her touch. Somewhere in the hall, someone took a deep breath. Another person sat with hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed forward. The judges were no longer separated from the audience by role or position. They were part of the moment, just like everyone else. The music began to turn inward again. After the strength came reflection. The sound softened, but it did not weaken. It felt thoughtful, grounded. The woman allowed space between phrases, letting the emotion settle. She trusted the silence to speak where sound could not. Her calm presence never left her. Even now, at the height of the performance, she remained steady. This was not a moment that surprised her. It was a moment she had prepared for quietly over a lifetime. The melody slowed, carrying warmth and clarity. It felt like a gentle hand placed over a racing heart. The audience leaned into the sound, not wanting it to end. They were no longer observers. They were participants in something shared. The woman's fingers softened their touch. The piano responded with a tender voice, rich and full of meaning. This was the sound of understanding, of acceptance, of strength without display. The music now moved toward its final stretch. The energy in the room changed again, filled with quiet anticipation. Everyone sensed that something important was nearing its close. The woman felt it too. She guided the music carefully, honoring every note. The sound carried the weight of the journey that had come before. It did not rush toward the end. It respected it. The hall felt held together by the final phrases, and as the music continued, one truth became clear to everyone listening. This performance was no longer just impressive. It was unforgettable. The music began to slow, not because it was losing strength, but because it had reached a place of understanding. The woman at the piano felt it clearly. This was the moment where everything she had given needed to settle, to land gently in the hearts of those listening. Her hands moved with care now. Each note felt deliberate, almost tender. The sound softened, but it carried the full weight of what had come before. It was like a long story nearing its final words, choosing them wisely. The hall was completely still. No one shifted. No one whispered. Even breathing felt quieter. The audience was fully present, held by the music in a way that felt rare and shared. The woman's face remained calm, but there was a quiet warmth in her expression. She was no longer reaching forward. She was guiding the music home. The piano responded with a gentle voice. Notes flowed slowly, creating space for reflection. The sound felt honest, open, and deeply human. In the audience, people felt different things. Some felt a sense of peace. Others felt emotion rise without warning. A few felt memories surface, moments they had forgotten they carried. No one needed to explain it. The music spoke clearly enough. The woman allowed pauses between phrases, letting silence become part of the performance. These moments of quiet were not empty. They were full of meaning. One of the judges rested both hands on the table, eyes fixed on the stage. There was no analysis left to do, only listening. The melody returned briefly to a familiar theme from earlier, but now its sound had changed, deeper, wiser, like something that had traveled far and come back whole. The woman's fingers pressed the keys lightly, drawing out a final rise in the music. It was not loud. It did not demand attention. It invited it. The hall leaned into that invitation. The sound swelled just enough to fill the space, then slowly began to fade. The woman guided it carefully, respecting every note until it released. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment after the sound ended. She did not rush to move. She allowed the final note to finish speaking. The silence that followed was deep and complete. It was not awkward. It was full. For a brief moment, no one reacted. Not because they were unsure, but because they were moved. The kind of stillness that comes when people need a second to return to themselves. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. One clap became several. Several became many. The sound grew, spreading through the hall like a wave. People stood without planning to. Chairs shifted. Hands came together again and again. The applause filled the room, strong and sincere. It was not polite. It was grateful. The woman stood from the bench calmly. She did not rush. She did not smile widely or raise her arms. She simply turned toward the audience and bowed gently. Her posture remained steady. Her expression stayed humble. She accepted the moment without trying to hold onto it. The judges rose as well. Their faces showed something close to awe, not because they had seen perfection, but because they had witnessed truth. The applause continued, growing louder, then softer, then loud again. Some people clapped above their heads. Others wiped their eyes quietly while continuing to applaud. The woman bowed once more, then stepped back from the piano. The instrument stood silent now, its role complete. As she walked off the stage, people followed her with their eyes, not out of curiosity, but respect. Behind the stage, the noise of the hall softened. The woman paused for a moment alone. She took a slow breath. Her hands, which had carried so much, rested easily at her sides. They were calm again. There was no rush of pride, no sudden need for validation, only a quiet sense of peace. She had played honestly. That was enough. Out in the hall, people remained standing even after the applause began to fade. Some turned to one another, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others smiled softly, still holding on to the feeling the performance would be talked about later. Words like powerful, unforgettable, rare would be used, but none of those words fully captured what had happened. What stayed with people was not just the sound, but the way it made them feel seen. The woman did not linger. She gathered her things quietly and prepared to leave. There were no speeches waiting, no urgent need to explain herself. As she stepped outside, the air felt cooler. The noise of the city returned slowly, gently. She walked forward with the same calm she had carried onto the stage. Inside the hall, the elite audience would remember this night for a long time, not because they had expected greatness, but because they had been reminded that it often arrives quietly. And though many would search for her name afterward, what truly mattered had already been shared. A calm presence. An honest performance, and a moment where applause rose not from habit, but from the heart.